grade, I moved to a new school. My dad's a pastor, so I was always moving around, going from school to school. And then in 7th grade, I moved to Mount Pleasant area, junior, senior high school, and there I met a guy named Brady Hunker. At the time, when we were, 12 and 13, he was 1.5 feet shorter than me, pretty much. But we just became really great friends right away, and our families just became really close really fast, and we spent a lot of time together. And then when we got into high school, we started having a romantic relationship with one another and would just spend a lot of time together. We were just really great friends. And then in the summer before our sophomore year, Brady had been having a lot of pain in his right lower leg, and so he went to the doctors and they couldn't figure it out at first, but then eventually they had an x-ray done, and after further testing they found that Brady had bone cancer. Technically it was called Ewing's sarcoma, and there was a tumor the size of a brick lodged in between the two bones in Brady's right lower leg. And so he started treatment when we were just 15. But even then, Brady and I were really close even as we were young and teenagers. We just knew that there was something that we had that most of the world didn't have. And so we stayed together, and I fought alongside him as he went through treatment. And quickly after seeing this guy respond to this horrific news, a teenager getting cancer, seeing his optimism and faith in the Lord was really admirable. And so I quickly knew that he was the one that I would eventually be with. I didn't know how that was going to happen, but I just had a lot of confidence that we were supposed to be together. And so Brady goes through treatment during our sophomore year for 9 months, has surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, and then he's all good. He's in the clear, and the cancer is gone. And so we were able to have a good amount of time in high school where we were able to be a normal couple doing normal high school things, going to dances, going on dates on the weekends, until he started to have pain again in our junior year. And he went to the doctors, did more scans, and found that the cancer had returned. And this time it was not just in his leg, but it was everywhere in his body. And so after this news, we were obviously both devastated because we had started to plan out our lives together, and we knew that we were going to be together for the long haul, but we didn't ever plan for cancer in our lives again. We thought we were done with the cancer, but we weren't. And so he starts treatment again, and after a while of being together and fighting this disease a second time together, we started thinking about what we would want out of life if life was cut short for both of us. And we both realized that we wanted to be married and we wanted to be together. And so we prayed about it, we asked for other people's advice, and after a long time of discerning whether or not we should get married, we decided to get hitched. So after graduating high school in the summer of 2019, Brady and I, on the hottest day of the year when it was 105 degrees, we pledged our lives to each other no matter what, and we knew that life had crazy turns and twists, but we wanted to be riding that roller coaster of life together. And so we got married in July of 2019, and then just a few months later, we're starting college together, we have an apartment together, but then Brady starts to get severe headaches. And so again, we go to the doctors to see if there needs to be a new treatment that we try or just what's going on. And on September 11th, less than 2 months after we got married, the doctors told us that there was no options left for treatment, and they gave Brady about a month to live. And so we leave college, we go, and Brady gets on hospice, and then shortly after that, he passes away on November 25th in 2019. And so obviously I never would have imagined that I would become a widow after 4 months of being married, that I would be widowed at 19 as a teenager. But the love that Brady and I shared in the short amount of time that we had together is totally worth the pain that this loss has brought into my life. So since Brady died of bone cancer, he didn't die suddenly, and his death was not unexpected. So I was preparing for his death months and weeks before he took his last breath, and he was also preparing. So in that sense, I wasn't shocked the morning of November 25th when Brady died. I was obviously still blown away by the waves of grief that came over me that day, but I had been preparing as much as I could for this death before it came, and that doesn't make it easier, but it does make the grieving process different. And so starting in September, when we were told that Brady was gonna die within weeks and months, that's when I believe the real grief started. Always before that, when I would be anxious about Brady possibly dying, it was always just a possibility, and it was something I would worry about, but I would distract myself and say, no, that's not happening right now, everything's okay. But starting at September, that worry became more of a reality that I had to really work through and deal with. And so once Brady started on hospice care is when I really started to see pieces of him being pulled away, and I realized that I was losing him little by little, that it didn't just happen all at once. And so, for example, there came a time where he wasn't able to walk anymore. There came a time when he came downstairs and sat in a recliner, and he didn't get up from that spot. And I realized that as that was happening, that I knew that Brady and I would never just take a walk together anymore or get out of that house that we were staying in. And then so in that sense, I was losing a friend that I had done things with. And then later Brady is unable to eat or speak and talk, and so then I lose the person that I always talked to, and I remained caring for him and being his main caregiver, but he couldn't respond in ways that he had before. And really in the month of November, he died a very slow and a very painful death. And obviously I don't wish that kind of death upon anybody, but I saw right before me that the man that was the strongest, physically strongest guy I knew, I just saw his strength leave him and leave his body to where he couldn't lift up his arm anymore. That to itch under his arm is something that he needed. I needed to lift his arm for him. And so just being there every moment in the end was really painful. And so the day that he died, but he had lost so much before that. I had already lost someone that I talked to. I already lost someone that I did everything with. I had already lost the man who would make me breakfast in the morning or get me water at 2 a.m. because I was thirsty, because he couldn't do any of those things. And so when he died, it was the final piece of him that left, but I had lost so many pieces before that and had been grieving all of those pieces as they were taken away from me. So I had heard the phrase, "it's okay not to be okay," long before Brady died and long before I became a widow. And I had understood, I think on a surface level, what that meant, that it's good to be honest with yourself and with those around you, how you were truly feeling. But it really wasn't until I had started grieving the loss of my husband that I realized the truth in those words, that it's okay not to be okay. Because the truth was, after my husband died, I was not even not okay, I was terrible. I was living my greatest nightmare. That's what the truth was. That's what my reality was. So if I were to play this part and act like everything was fine, I would just be lying to myself and lying to those around me. And so I think the power in the phrase, "it's okay not to be okay," it's almost an encouragement to be honest with those around us and with ourselves, because sometimes there are things that happen in this life that are so terrible that they aren't okay, and it's not okay for us to live through them. They're just really bad things. And so I think being honest with ourselves allows us to get the help that we need from other people. Not saying that that help will fix us or fix our problems, but it'll help us walk through the hard times and live through the times in our lives where we're really truly struggling and when we're not okay. After Brady died, I found my phone going off every 3 seconds with messages from everybody. I had hundreds of messages within 24 hours of Brady dying, and everyone was telling me so many things, and honestly, almost, if not all of the things that people told me were not helpful, and some of them even hurtful. I specifically remember this one message that I got on Wednesday morning Now, to give context, Brady had died on Monday morning, so this was about 48 hours after my husband died. I get this message on Facebook saying, "I'm so sorry for your loss. When will you remarry?" And I realized in that moment, that was one of the first moments that I realized that my grief was, it almost felt like it was a barrier between me and the world, that the world had no idea what I was going through. That's what it felt like, at least at that time. And other things that people told me were, "Let me know if you need anything." That was a really popular one. Everyone wants to butt in and message you and say, "Let me know if you need anything." And I think on the surface that sounds like that would be a totally good thing to say. But what it did for me is it made me feel more isolated because I didn't know what I needed. I didn't know what things I needed after my husband died, and I also didn't know what people could do for me. So one thing that I realized within a few weeks after Brady died was that I needed a car, because the car that Brady had, we had a car accident before, and there were just situations where I wasn't able to use that car anymore, so I needed a vehicle. But I didn't know if anyone around me was willing to help me figure out how to get a car, because no one had let me know what they were able to do. So I think "let me know if you need anything" is one of those phrases that it sounds nice, but it really wasn't helpful for me. And a lot of people always told me at Brady's memorial service, or just in interactions I had with people after his death, that he's in a better place now. Almost as if that meant that I shouldn't be grieving as much, or that it should be a comfort to me. And Brady and I are both Christians, and we both believe that Jesus came to die so that we can live. And so I know that Brady is resting with my Father in heaven, but that doesn't mean that my grief is less real or less horrible while I'm here on earth, because he's not with me. And so I know where Brady is, but I also know where I am, and I know that I'm not with him right now, and that's why I'm grieving. I trust you in your plans to give just what I need, just what I need. You give me just what I need. I do remember a few instances where people spoke some words and they brought some levity. And the words that they spoke probably shock a lot of people, but it was when people would say, "There's nothing I can say to you. I have nothing to tell you that's going to make this better. But I'm here, and I'll sit with you." It was actually the words that were speaking the truth, that they had nothing to say, that meant the most to me. And some interactions that I had that were really helpful were, one of them was at Brady's memorial service. I talked to hundreds of people, which was quite emotionally draining to speak to hundreds of people after your husband dies. But one of the things that some people did was they didn't say anything as they were talking to me. They just held me for a minute and we just wept together. And that was far more helpful and far more comforting than people who said, "Oh, Brady's in a better place now." So I really do appreciate the people who were just honest, and they said, "I don't know what to tell you. I don't have any words that could make you feel better." Strangely enough, those things actually did make me feel better than words of trying to shove comfort down my throat. People who were just honest with how they thought, it was far more helpful and far more comforting. So the anniversaries of the deaths of people that we love are always difficult, and I've always been a big date person. I've always known people's birthdays and anniversaries of getting married, and just all the dates I've always loved. And so in my grieving process, the dates that have mattered to Brady and I have also been particularly difficult to live through them without Brady. And so I knew the anniversary of our wedding was very difficult. So then leading up into the fall, when I was anticipating the anniversary of his death, it was really hard for me. And the entire month of November in 2020, which was a year after Brady died, the entire month of November was difficult. And just feeling the seasons change and feeling the temperatures drop just brought me back to that place where I was witnessing the death of my husband all over again. And so knowing that this day in November would mean a great deal, I was praying truly that the Lord would help me through that day and would send some people into my life that could sit with me on November 25th as I remember the death that Brady had on that day. And a few weeks prior to November 25th, a friend reaches out to me and says, "Hey, I just want to let you know that I'm available to be with you for this day that was coming up." And what was so beautiful about this is I didn't reach out to my friend first. I didn't even tell her, Brady's death anniversary is coming up and I don't know what to do. She took the initiative to reach out to me because she knew that that day meant a lot to me and she wanted to be there for me. So that was one of the most helpful things that people have done, was reach out and let me know that they're going to be thinking of me and that they'll be willing to sit with me during that day. And so my friend came over to my house and she brought with her Brady's favorite meal from one of his favorite restaurants in Pittsburgh. And so we had chili cheese fries together and just cried over these fries as we were eating because Brady couldn't be with us. But that was helpful to enjoy something that Brady enjoyed. And then later that day we watched clips from my wedding video together and just looked through all kinds of pictures, and I was just able to share with my friend all these memories that I had of Brady, because I always want to talk about Brady. He's the guy that I love more than anybody else in this world, and so obviously I want to share about the love that we had together. And my friend just sat and listened and asked questions, and we laughed and we cried, and it was a beautiful way to spend such a terrible day. And I'm so grateful that she came and sat with me and we just remembered my love together. So in 2019, when Brady died, he died on a Monday and Thanksgiving holiday was on a Thursday. So just a few days after I send off my husband's body to the funeral home director, I find myself sitting at this table where we're going around and saying what we're grateful for and what we're thankful for. And on Thanksgiving Day in 2019, I could not utter anything. I was not grateful or thankful for anything. I was so upset that just a few days prior, my husband had died. And so I knew when Brady died at the end of November that his death anniversary would always be close to Thanksgiving. But this year, it is on Thanksgiving Day. And so I still, being so close to this holiday, I still don't know quite what I'm going to do, but I know that I don't want to be sitting around a table where I have to act like I'm thankful for everything that's going on. And maybe that day I'll wake up and I'll see some glimpses of hope and there will be things in this life that I'm thankful for, but I am not going to force myself to say anything that I don't believe, because sometimes grief clouds our visions and makes us feel like everything is going wrong. And I think there's a beauty in being honest with ourselves and being honest with others when those days come. And so I might wake up on November 25th. I might wake up on Thanksgiving morning and not want to be around anybody. And if that happens, I'm going to give myself the grace to spend that day how I wish. And who knows, because I never know how grief is going to affect me, I might wake up that morning and want to sit around the table and say that I'm so grateful that I married Brady and that I loved him. And I will allow myself to feel that gratitude with no guilt either. So I think something that's important for me as I've been grieving for a while is to be honest with myself and to be genuine with my grief with other people. And sometimes people will understand and sometimes they won't, but my job is not to make people comfortable. My job is to do what's best for me and to grieve as I need to grieve. And so I still am not sure how that day is going to go. It's probably going to bring up a lot of mixed feelings, but I do know that I'm going to stay off of social media so I don't have to read all of the posts about people's lives being so great, because that will probably not be healthy for me. But I'm going to be honest on that day, like I am every day, about the life that I live and the grief that I go through. So there's these two sides to the life that I'm living now. There are probably more than two sides, but two main aspects that I try to hold both with the same hand, or with at the same time. And one of those things that I'm going through is that I'm truly grieving, and it's a heartbreaking time all of the time when I think about what Brady went through and how I'm living without him. That will always hurt, and it will always bring pain into my life. But that's not the only thing that I'm experiencing. I'm not only experiencing pain and sorrow. There's also this joy that I have. And it was given to me far earlier than I thought it would. As a believer in Jesus, I know that God works out all things for good for those who love him. But I always thought that the rewards of this life would come later, that they would only be in heaven, is when we would experience true joy and hope and peace. And so when Brady died, I thought that I would live the rest of my life as this sorrowful widow, just waiting until the day that I die to experience any hope and any joy. And just months after Brady's death, I started to receive this joy from the Lord, that it wasn't like I woke up and I'm like, I'm going to choose joy today. But it was God giving me this hope and giving me this sight that he is still good. And then I started making the effort to see the Lord working in every step of my life, and choosing joy and choosing hope, even when it seemed like it was not an option to choose. And so I am filled with so much joy of the Lord, but I'm also still hurting. And depending on the person I talk to, I want to highlight one or the other, because some people will say, oh, you have so much joy, that must mean that you're all good and that you've moved on and that you're not hurting anymore. And to those people I say, no, the grief is still so real and painful, and it's something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. And then there are people who say, oh, your life must be so terrible because your husband died, that you can have no ounce of hope. And to those people I say, no, my God is so good, and there's so much joy that I have in my life. So the joy and the sorrow, the pain and the hope are together. I hold them together. And some days one is easier to hold than the other, but I will choose to walk through this life being honest and saying that, yes, I have joy, and yes, I am grieving. Yes, I have so much pain because my husband died. And yes, I have so much hope because Jesus died and lived and lives today. And so I hold both of those things with open hands, and I choose to be honest about my experience with joy and grief with everyone that I come into contact with. After Brady died, so many people told me so many terrible things about how to grieve, and this advice came from people who weren't in my shoes. And so I found myself ranting a lot about the things that people would say to me, and I started ranting to my dad. I'm like, can you believe this person said this thing to me? And my dad said, why don't you start a blog? Almost, I feel, because my dad, I think, was tired of me complaining to him. And so because I was so frustrated, I'm like, yeah, I'll start a blog and I'll just write down all my feelings and then just get it out there. And so I did. I started a blog called Widow at 19, and I just started writing everything about my grief experience. And I didn't care what people thought, or I just wrote. And so one of the first blogs that I wrote was called Say His Name. And I found that processing my feelings through writing was super helpful for me to understand what I was feeling and what I was thinking. And I'm also so grateful, as I'm about 2 years out from Brady's death. It's so comforting to read back on the things that I had written before, and to see where I was and to remember those feelings. And so writing has been a big part of my grieving process. Now I write just as much as I used to, but I don't post things as much because I realize that it's more for me than it is for other people. So I'm still writing all the time, but sometimes I will release things into the world, and sometimes I'll keep things for myself. But I'm still writing all of the time. And a few months after Brady died, I came back to Grove City College, where I am a student, and I got back into the touring choir, which I had been a part of before Brady died. And singing in with a group of people was really therapeutic for me, to make music, to make something beautiful, even though my life was tragic at times. And one of the ministries that came about from going back to school is a ministry called Songs for Revival, where I met a group of students at Grove City who just welcomed me with so much love and so much empathy, and just wanted to sit with me in the grief. And there was this ministry that formed where I was able to share the heartache that I experienced in a way that showed people that Jesus cares about our suffering and our times of pain, that his heart goes out to us, and that he wants to sit with us and weep with us as he did in the scriptures. And so that was something that was really beautiful. It was a way that God has used the pain for good, and that doesn't mean that the pain is less painful. It still hurts, but it's comforting to know that God sees me as I'm hurting and still wants to use my pain to help other people, and to help me see that he is still good and that he's with me through it all. So I definitely do believe that writing my feelings out and singing my feelings has been really helpful for me to understand what I'm going through, but also it's been a way for me to connect with other people through words and through song. So I think my blog is one way that people can definitely stay up to date on the things that I'm going through. Sometimes in different seasons of my life I'll post more or less, but that's always a way that people can stay up to date and to follow along at Widow at 19 as I'm sharing what I'm going through and what grieving as a young person looks like, and what it means to be a young widow in today's culture. And I think another way to follow along with what's happening in my life is to follow along with the Songs for Revival ministry. You can check it out at songsforrevival.com. I have an extended story on there where I share my testimony and I share about how the Lord has been working in my life, because I do think and I do know that the Lord is working through my suffering and through the pain of others to still show that he is a good God and that he cares for us. Even when the worst things happen, he is still there. And so if you want to learn more about that, please feel free to check out songsforrevival.com and listen to music that is released there. So you can check out my blog at Widow at 19, or check out songsforrevival.com to continue to see what life will throw at me, or how the Lord will continue to work in my life.